What's going on, you guys? Welcome back to JEB and Flow on the Street Parking Podcast channel. I have a very special guest with me here today. This is Dr. Erica Boland. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here. So Erica is, I guess you wear a lot of hats. She's a chiropractor, mother of four, a doula. She's Miranda's doula, and we won't get into that because I feel like she might want to save that story for her thing.
Yeah.
But she also is the creator of the functional progressions.
Yes.
And the functional progressions are in the warm-up section of the members-only website if you're a street parking member. So that's really what we're going to kind of get into today. But first things first, just so everyone can get to know you a little bit better, what is your story? Where are you from? How'd you get into all of this?
Yeah. I'm from Wisconsin, and my husband and I have our practice in West Salem, Wisconsin, tiny little town. So how I got into all of this, long story short, I actually originally wanted to be a midwife. I got into the nursing program. I didn't like it, and my husband was studying chiropractic at the time. So that's how I got involved with chiropractic. And then in my schooling, I spent some time in Prague, shadowing in the Czech Republic, shadowing the physiotherapists there. Mm-hmm. And what I saw there was their way of rehab for the core and pelvic floor was so much different than ours. And when I returned, I was pretty new into practice, and the functional progression is based off of the work that I learned in Prague and a technique called DNS.
Yeah.
But yeah, I specifically work with the parenthood population, prenatal, postpartum, and then obviously during birth as a doula. So I use the functional progression with that population. My husband uses it with his athletes. So it's really, truly the way that we're designed to move, put into a sequence.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I feel like I should apologize to Carolina because she went to the DNS seminar, and then she's done all the birth fit stuff, and she's been a big proponent of the functional progressions. She did them herself. And I actually have a little bit of diastasis, and she's told me, just very gently suggested so many times, like, oh, maybe you should check out these functional progressions. And I've started a couple of times, like, oh, am I doing the first one right?
Yeah.
And then never really followed through with it. And then recently, I just, in preparation for this conversation, really started doing them and was like, first of all, wow, my core is not nearly as stable or strong as I thought. And it's very imbalanced. And I noticed a significant difference in how I moved after I did them.
Nice.
Yeah, I know. So, I feel like Carolina, with so many things, does that. She's like, oh yeah, maybe you should check this out. And then it takes me forever. And then I finally do it. I'm like, wow, yeah, you were
right.
You were right.
I know the feeling.
So, okay, cool. So let's see. There's so many places that we could start here. But what I kind of wanted to talk about really was, this is something that a lot of the moms are familiar with. Mm-hmm. I know a lot of the moms listen to or watch this podcast. And I feel like this is also something that, like you're saying, would benefit everybody.
Yeah.
And probably a lot of the non-moms, a lot of the guys might be a little bit shy to get involved in it. And so I kind of wanted to talk about how it would be beneficial for everyone, why we should do it, what exactly they are. I guess maybe the first thing I should say is, if you have no idea what we're talking about, you might want to pause it
check it out
and go check it out. Like I said, it's on the members only website. You could probably Google it and find it on the internet. Somewhere else too. So it came out of this dynamic neuromuscular stabilization, right?
Yeah.
And when you say that their approach was a little different to ours when it comes to rehab with the pelvic floor and whatnot, how is it different?
Yeah, on several levels. But here, especially with the population that I work with most, which would be women, the healing of the core and pelvic floor gets pigeonholed into sit-ups and Kegels. And that's single muscle activation. So that's getting a lot of strength in one plane, but not in your entire core. And I had taken several DNS courses before I went to Prague, but being just submerged in it, in addition to in the Czech language, so being forced to figure out what they were doing and why, I saw that if we want long-term stability and like a better foundation, men or women, then we need to continue to progress in the way that we were designed to move, rather than just single muscle activation or aesthetic only based training. And so it's really applicable to any person because, again, it's the way we were born to move. When you watch children move, they move so beautifully. And then that kind of just breaks down over time because of habits. So I saw that there was this global core approach that tied in breath and movement, and simultaneously pelvic floor is then activated properly without having to do Kegels or without having to do sit-ups and crunches, and people were having good results there. So I tried it out in our office on a new patient, new out of school, and it worked. And so then it just went on from there. And I think the reason that, and maybe in the street parking population, probably in other populations as well, because we see that in our local gyms, some guys or non-moms kind of shy away from it a little bit because I designed it specifically for women in the parenthood transition. However, it's the way we were all designed to move. And guys have a pelvic floor, guys have a core. So like I said, my husband uses it with his athletes as well.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, well then that is, I got my prop here.
Yes.
So I've got an empty can of Waterloo if you're not watching this. But you just said a bunch of stuff that I wanted to hopefully remember to touch on. First of all, what exactly is the core?
Yeah.
Because everyone just thinks it's your abs.
Yes. So the core, your true anatomical core is like neck to pelvis. Mm-hmm. And when I'm talking about breath work or training the core, functional progression, we're talking about diaphragm to pelvic floor. So if we're using this Waterloo can for something other than making the new famous ACV drink, right. You can think about diaphragm as the top, pelvic floor as the bottom, whether you're male or female. The front of the canister would be your abdominal muscles, and the back would be your back muscles. And so when this can is open, there's nothing in it, but to step on it or even press on it, it won't go anywhere because it's stabilized, and if it were closed, it would be even more pressurized. But as soon as I were to put a dent in that can, I could use my hands to just crush it. So obviously, in the human body, we're a little more dynamic than that. The crushing doesn't happen immediately, but over time, if we're continuing to train in one direction, or like think about sit-ups or crunches, that's a continuous dent in the can. Mm-hmm. You'll pay for that, typically an injury or pain, etc. So using the functional progression in combination with breath work as warm-up or cool down, and even part of your training, depending on where you are in your level of fitness, helps you build on this stable foundation instead of a foundation that's already compromised.
Gotcha. So, okay, the core functional progressions starts with diaphragmatic breathing.
Yes.
And we associate that with belly breathing a lot of time, right?
For sure.
And so when you breathe, your diaphragm goes down.
Yes.
What does the pelvic floor do?
Yes. Good. So diaphragm and pelvic floor work in synchrony. They work together. So as you breathe in, diaphragm should drop down, pelvic floor drops down a little bit. And then as you exhale, it returns to the resting position. So it doesn't move past the resting position. There is no drawing in and up like some programs teach, but it's just an inhale with drops, diaphragm down, pelvic floor down, and then an exhale, return to start. So it works together in synchrony if it's working right. So when you inhale and diaphragm drops down, that also adds more pressure to the canister that we just talked about. The air would be like the liquid inside of the can.
So is the pelvic floor, I know they're moving in sync. Is it contracting when the diaphragm's contracting?
So eccentric, meaning in the lengthening of the muscle.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, so the whole like Kegel thing, or like this feeling like you're trying to cut off, like when you're trying to not pee.
Not pee, right.
That happens on the way back up to normal or on the way down?
No. So you don't need to do the Kegel in that at all, which is new for a lot of people. That's like, wait, what did she say?
Yeah.
So the thing in my office, and I work very closely with a physical therapist. And so if there's any internal work needed or external, obviously, but more intimate work needed for a male, I refer to her. I don't do any internal work. But we use Kegels only to help people feel how to relax, or upon assessment under supervision to know that the Kegel is actually done correctly. The pelvic floor is such an intricate system of muscles, and you can have too much or too little tone in the same pelvic floor, overactive, underactive in the same pelvic floor. So a Kegel can actually do more harm than good. So let's use the example of incontinence. If there's leaking of urine at any time, common, not normal, but that can be because of too much tightness. And most people think like, well, if it's leaking, then we need to make it more tight, which it can become a vicious cycle. So the Kegel, upon just doing your breath work, can be left out. And even within the functional progression, there doesn't need to be a Kegel at all. So that's like, if you're going to be doing Kegels, it needs to be under the supervision of a PT that's doing internal work really and has helped you figure out what that feels like when done appropriately.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really important distinction to make. So would it be safe to say, like, if when you're breathing, if you feel that pressure, that you're doing it right?
Doing it right. Yes, most of the time.
Right,
if you have your favorite pair of sweatpants on, you think about breathing all the way 360 degrees all the way around. So into your front body, into your back body, into your side body. It isn't that we don't want full expansion of the lungs, just not upward motion of the chest. So I recommend people to start this by lying on their back and putting their feet up on the couch or a chair or something. It brings pelvis and rib cage neutral. So then diaphragm and pelvic floor are parallel with one another.
Yeah.
And you can better access it. In addition to, then when you're sitting upright, you're fighting gravity as well. So it just like shuts those muscles off and just allows you to really focus here.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Okay. So we know what the core is. We know what the breathing should sort of look and feel like.
Right.
And then we get into some of the movement. And what I think I've heard you say before is, I mean, in this conversation, moving like we're supposed to move. And then I think in another video, you were talking about how like we are now bipedal, but we start kind of on the ground.
Right.
So I kind of want to just like get into that. Like how did that movement, like, and again, you guys should watch this, but the dead bug type movement is great, but it looks like if I were to watch the functional progressions, I'm like, is this alien technology that somehow was given to you? You know what I mean? Yeah. So how do we start with that movement? Why do we start with that movement? And how does that eventually take us upright?
So without getting too nerdy into the science of it,
we can get super nerdy. Totally.
Functional progression 1 looks a lot like a dead bug. The difference is in the starting position and then the execution. So basically the position of the hip, the knee, and then again, it's also meant to be super slow with intention rather than for reps or time. Right. So that's also what makes it a little frustrating because most of us don't want to slow down at all. But that's sagittal plane stability that we're building. So unless our breath and core are active here, then our shoulder can't move efficiently and effectively. Our hip can't move efficiently and effectively. So when you use FP1 and you start to go through that movement, you're working core stability in addition to the ability to move your shoulder and move your hip while this is stable, which translates into actually every single movement, including just walking to your car, right? But then at the end of the day, what it's really doing is retraining your brain that, hey, this is my powerhouse. All movement comes through here. This is where I need to be active. And so then I can go about my workout or go about my day more efficiently and effectively, which we've seen over time usually adds to greater gains in strength and in speed and balance and flexibility. And like you said, I just feel like my core is more active is a pretty common description from patients. But each one has its own unique, as a chiropractor, I have a favorite, what do I use what movement for? But the really cool thing too, because it is retraining your brain how to move the right way, is no matter which you do, you're affecting the whole entire system for more stability.
Yeah. I love that. I was thinking if you watch really high level weightlifters. Yep. And when they fail, they just drop the weight. They don't crumple into this weird position. But if you watch us amateurs, recreational people, the first thing that happens is we just fold, this whole can just smashes. Yeah. And then we maybe still stand it up or we don't.
Right.
I feel like this could be really helpful in that.
Yeah.
Just.
One of my husband's patients is a world champion weightlifter. And so it was pretty cool to see him come in and try to do the functional progressions. He was in our office for a reason. He was having knee pain and hip symptoms, low back symptoms, etc. But people think that I'm strong enough, so I don't need to do this. But if you have a core that's efficient and effective, and you continue to return to that, you can build more strength on top of it. So it may be the missing piece to you moving up on your 1 rep max or whatever.
Yeah.
But again, as long as it's done slow and with intention instead of just a check that box, did it as quick as I could type of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Mindful movement.
Right. Yes.
So I've been having this knee pain, and it's in the quad tendon just above my kneecap, and I've been doing all kinds of work, smashing my quads and whatnot. Yeah. And then I realized through a lot of experimentation, it was actually something, it was related somehow to my psoas or my hip flexor, right?
Yeah.
And then in going through these and then doing some other work just on that, it's the knee pain has really been helped.
Good. Good.
So I just find it super interesting, and I think it's something we always want to go to the place where we feel the problem. Mm-hmm. And so often it's actually way further upstream than that, you know?
Yeah, by the time you feel symptoms, it's probably been going on for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now there's 4 functional progressions, right? And then there's the transitions between the two, which I believe are super important, right?
Super important. Like any other transition in life, they're the toughest. Mm-hmm. And really call for you to give yourself a ton of grace as you're learning them, because it's really nitpicky movement and meant to be done even slower. But don't skip them.
Yeah.
They're easy to skip.
I really wanted to skip them, to be honest.
Same.
I believe it was the transition to functional progression 2, I believe,
Yep.
and then actually functional progression 2, which is where you're on your side.
Yep.
And on my right side, I felt like, oh, this is great. I could do this all day. I feel strong. It's fairly effortless. And then I went on my left side, and it was almost impossible the first couple times. And it felt like hard to connect to whatever my movers were supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I want to talk a little bit about like just imbalances, how they might show up, how we pretty much live our lives, maybe being a little bit unaware of them.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Yeah. Just like you have a dominant hand, typically we're a little stronger on one side for some reason or another, especially if you've been in a sport throughout your youth that is one side dominant and never were taught to do a lot of like contralateral or opposite side training. That can come at a very young age. And realistically, sometimes in our office, we relate it all the way back to this person never crawled, which is one of the most important movements for children to do to avoid imbalances. But the biggest thing that I can say for the street parking members and anyone really is to video yourself or have a long mirror. If you don't have a big mirror in your house, but you have like one of the long ones, just turn it on its side and watch, not the whole time, depending on what your movement you're doing, but get that visual feedback. And that helps obviously for visual learners too, but looking at, even in comparison to like, what is the instructional video versus how do I look? Because you will feel normal in your imbalance because that's what you're used to. Your body carries itself this way. And it's not surprising that you just told us you have left hip pain, left knee issues, and you had difficulties doing the functional progression on the left
Shocker,
side. Right. So it's also about improvement and not perfection. So don't skip them because you feel like they're not perfect or you're not doing them right. But yeah, it's more common than not that there's one side that's stronger than the other.
So here's what I also wanted to ask you and that I was thinking about. I also have like a little weird, it comes and goes, but it's not irregular left shoulder stuff too. And I don't know if this is from carrying a heavy backpack for a long time when it was cool to only have it on one side, but my right shoulder sits substantially lower than the left. So I always figured that this side is like, there's more compression or tightness here. So is it possible that all the stuff that's on the left side, the issues, there's a relationship between tightness on the right side?
Yeah, I would say it's not only possible, but probable. Because just like if you're going to choose one of the functional progressions to help increase your core stability, it'll affect the whole body. Eventually, compensation patterns affect the entire body. And the knee is a perfect example because I say the knee's like the bastard child. Unless it's an external injury, it's typically not the knee. It's typically coming from somewhere else. So then, as a chiropractor, it's my job to figure out where that is. But that might be helpful for you to know if you've been dealing with any nitpicky injuries that it may not be that exact area.
Totally.
Yeah. But yeah, it's likely related.
So, yeah, it's just so funny. It's like, well, it's called the core for a reason.
Right.
If you can kind of focus on that for a few minutes a day.
Yeah. So when I'll touch on this real quick because the function, let's be honest, it can get boring if you're going to do the whole thing and the same thing every single day. Nobody likes that, or at least I don't. So I knew that when I designed this, it had to be attainable, achievable for my patients, which means it needs to be able to be varied. It needs to be changed to be also easy-ish, right? Easy to remember, easy to understand. And you don't have to do the whole entire thing with transitions every single day. If you can spend 5 to 10 minutes on it a day and pick 1 and 3, 2 and 4, transition 1 and transition 2 for one day, and just really start to train it or change it up And then think about what you feel when you're in those movements and how that relates to what you're going to go into for the day. So transition 2, for example, is a great one to do before you're going to do any lower body work, because it's actually a really great glute activator with your core. That sort of stuff that gets a little more nerdy and nitpicky, but it isn't something that you have to do the whole entire thing every single day. And really, consistency is key, which I know you guys say that a lot, but it's true. So even if you just did 2 of them a day over time, life's going to happen. You're going to get away from it a little bit, but the smaller amount and being consistent with it is way more important than like once a week doing the whole full thing.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing to remember. And I was also just remembering too, when I used to train jiu-jitsu, in our warm-ups, we would do things like bear crawls. Yeah. And the only other time I've seen like shin box flow was for jiu-jitsu to prep for rolling, because there's so much hip action. And so yeah, it's not just for pregnant women, postpartum women, or any specific little population.
Right.
So let's see. I mean, maybe I feel like that should be probably a pretty big takeaway from this conversation, that it's something that everybody could and probably should do, integrate on some level. Would you say that there's any other big big things to kind of remember?
Yeah, I love, I'm in the street parking mamas group, and I love seeing the questions that come up in there, but also in the general members group. And I love, as a movement nerd, that I know this population is also getting strength training. So you mentioned before, in me talking about we're biped, so we're the only mammals that are on our 2 feet the majority of the time, and we need our core and our pelvic floor to support us accordingly, man or woman. So this movement is like the functional progression is the supplements to your training, as is vitamins to your nutrition. But it is important for you to come into upright training with a little bit of weight, and research shows us time and time again that helps with core and pelvic floor stability.
Yeah.
So
I love that.
Doing the right thing with weight training as well.
Speaking of weight training, is today's your 1 year of street parking?
It is.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And you also do running.
Yeah.
And do you feel like, I think running is one of those things that people think you just run, right? You just get out there and you just go. And then I've had a lot of athletes that I've worked with that have obviously knee problems, but like had neck and back problems. And it's almost always just a collapse kind of here, which I think kind of comes back to that whole, you got to crawl before you can walk, before you can run type thing. So I feel like I could just kind of nerd out on this stuff for a while, but I think we're probably getting close to the camera being cut off. So the one last thing I wanted to ask you was for diastasis, which is another thing that we kind of associate with postpartum or women, but I definitely have it. And I think that, we get confused with like the rectus abdominis, right? The 6-pack abs versus actual core strength.
Stability.
Exactly. So if you could, let's just talk about DR real quick and then wrap up.
For sure. It's not, everybody can have diastasis, for sure. And also important to know that a little bit of separation is totally normal, because what that is a split in rectus abdominal muscles. So you've got 2 long bellies of rectus abdominis that come down, and in between them is a really thin layer of tissue. And so in 100% of pregnancies, there's a diastasis. That's the area of least resistance. Your body's doing what it needs to do. And the big they say 2 finger widths is normal for a diastasis. but we also look at depth as well, integrity of the tissue. Diastasis is simply, if beyond normal measures, a sign of core dysfunction. So when I have patients come into my office and say they have a diastasis, I can use it as a marker for improvement. But the aesthetic piece of the diastasis being there isn't my biggest concern. It's just what can we implement to help stabilize throughout? And then typically you see reduction in neck symptoms, etc.
Yeah.
But a diastasis also isn't always bad. And you have to think about like sport-specific movements and things as well, whether like gymnastics, for example, where there is a lot of flexion and sagittal plane work, concentric activation of rectus. And so you use functional progression to counteract that so that you can move well the majority of the time, but you can still stay strong and make gains in your sport-specific training. So it's kind of like a counteract as well.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Functional progression 2 is my favorite for diastasis because you can come into the full expression of functional progression 2, feel your diastasis and feel if it's improving or not. And then you can even make adjustments in the neutrality of your spine and feel like, where can I create stability and where am I not?
Okay.
Yep.
Cool. I'm going to play with that. Functional progression 2. Awesome. All right. Well, Erica, thank you so much. This was awesome. And make sure that you guys check out the functional progressions. And I'm going to be doing them, and hopefully I don't bombard you with too much content with how it's going, but I feel like so far they've really made a difference for me, and it's important, and it's just something that we have available to all of you, so you should take advantage of that. So I love you guys. We'll talk to you soon. Thank you again.
Thank you.
This was awesome.